The pig, in my opinion, is the worst killer in Dead by Daylight.
And I think still at the bottom of the tier list is the pig.
You guys put pig in the B tier? Definitely would disagree with this one. Pig is one of the worst killers in the entire game.
The pig is argued to be one of, if not the weakest killer in Dead by Daylight. Given her slow crouching speed, her stealth ability becomes extremely situational, and the reverse bear trap's slow detonation time doesn't create a huge sense of urgency. This makes her a pretty basic M1 killer, leaving you to rely on your own looping skills instead of her unique powers. I set out to learn this killer to see if this really is the case, and spoiler, it isn't. My initial strategy going into the game was to find a survivor as fast as possible and get a trap on them before the first gen popped. I then would continue to slowly build up pressure while buying myself as much time as possible to do so. The build I decided to execute this plan with began with Lethal Pursuer to get into a chase immediately. Then I would build up momentum with Hex Plaything and save the best for last, allowing me to shorten chases with a lower basic attack cooldown and get the jump on survivors by making them oblivious. Finally, I would use Throwing Tremors to always know where to go next. For add-ons, I went with Razor Wires, which makes the skill checks for Jigsaw boxes more difficult, and if a healthy survivor fails a skill check, they'll become injured. Then if the injured survivor is using a Jigsaw box, they would have the deep wound status effect applied to them if they failed a skill check using the interlocking razor. Now something about me is that I'm not the best at looping as a survivor or a killer. I have minimal mind game skills and I normally need to rely on my perks and powers to assist. So something I noticed is that I would immediately enter a chase using Lethal Pursuer, but that didn't guarantee a down before the first gen was completed like I hoped. Especially without any other aura reading perks, all Lethal Pursuer did was reveal auras at the start, then deactivate for the rest of the game. And while that's okay for some builds, I pretty quickly realized that it wasn't worth one of my perk slots. I was hesitant to use Corrupt Intervention after its nerf. If you're unfamiliar with the perk, Corrupt Intervention blocks the 3 gens furthest from you for the first 2 minutes of the trial. This prevents survivors from hopping on the first gen that they see and give you a general sense of direction to where they're located. Now though, if you put a survivor into the dying state before those 2 minutes are up, the perk deactivates. This definitely is a perk worth trying, but you need to decide to yourself what elements of gameplay you want to enhance. The early game as Pig will be the most difficult, so decide if you want to try to make that easier on yourself, or use your perks to enhance your abilities for when you're most powerful. Speaking of this dilemma, I decided to briefly try an anti-looping build with Bamboozle, Brutal Strength, and Enduring. These perks allow you to briefly block a window that you vault, kicks pallets, breakable walls, and gens faster, then finally recover from pallet stuns faster. For the last perk, I kept Save the Best for last. The goal of this build was to try to make chases easier, but my lack of skill really didn't allow me to make the most of this build, so I pretty quickly knew at my skill level that it wasn't worth it. So I decided to revisit my original build. I got rid of Lethal Pursuer and replaced it with Deadlock. Whenever a generator gets finished, the next most repaired gen gets blocked for 30 seconds and you see its aura for that time. After that, I wanted to switch up my add-ons since very few people miss their skill checks on the Jigsaw box. The first new add-on I used was the Face Mask, which makes survivors with a trap on their head have the blindness status effect. They'll still see their auras of the Jigsaw boxes, but the important thing is that they won't see the aura of their Hex Plaything totem. The other add-on I used was the Utility Blade. Whenever a survivor has a reverse bear trap on their head, they're inflicted with the Hemorrhage status effect, meaning that they leave more pools of blood, and if a survivor's healing and it gets interrupted, that healing progress regresses. Honestly, I don't know how much this add-on actually did, especially without a perk like Nurse's Calling. I'm not sure how much value got out of this, so really feel free to use whatever second perk you want to for this. So with all these changes, I went back into games, and they went surprisingly well. Without any gen regression perks, I thought I would be gen rushed, but I wasn't. But I think instead of buying myself time by regressing gen progress, I got it in other forms that are difficult to observe as the killer. For starters, survivors with reverse bear traps will drop everything and try to get their trap off as soon as possible. Additionally, if someone finds a hex totem, they're almost always going to want to cleanse it. Then, if they do manage to finish a gen, those who are working on a different one will need to wait 30 seconds or go somewhere else. So your time definitely adds up, which is what you need the most as the pig. Your early game starts off rough. You have to catch your first survivor, you have no Save the Best for Last stacks, and you have no Hex Plaything totems. On top of that, so many pallets will get thrown in your face, so perk like Spirit's Fury will give you a lot of value as the pig. Something else to help with this though is if survivors are jumping over a pallet waiting to see which side you attack from, a great way to counter this is to crouch, then begin to dash one way and quickly switch directions. This almost always will guarantee a hit. However, be warned that experienced survivors will just leave the loop as soon as you crouch. Another thing to remember is that you can crouch to get rid of your terror race and red stain in the middle of a loop, and then pairing this with a calculated dash can be very successful. Also, if you're running save the best for last, a dash attack on your obsession won't lose you any stacks, so try this on them especially. This is something that I wasn't great at since I don't thrive at looping, and the strategy relies on accurately predicting where the survivor will run. So if you're like me, you don't have to do all these fancy maneuvers to be successful, but if you're better than me, I definitely recommend trying it. As the pig, you'll be strongest in the late game. When there are only 1 or 2 gens left, that's when you'll thrive. At this point you have a lot of save the best for last stacks, some plaything totems are up, and the survivors you've been chasing have gotten rid of several pesky pallets. If you do have some reverse bear traps left, they're so much more powerful now, since if the survivor has one on before the last gen is finished, then the exit gates get powered, the only way for them to leave is through the hatch. Just to be clear, putting a trap on someone after all the gens are done is completely useless. Also note that if you're in a chase with someone who has an active trap, their already long timer will pause, so there are definitely times where I wouldn't chase someone with an active trap for too long since I know that they're going to need to get to the right jigsaw box instead of working on the objective. I do this because it's very hard to play the pig if your goal is to kill survivors with your traps. The game is set up so that survivors have the time to check every single box if they need to before the timer runs out. Of the 50 games that I played, I only got 2 trap kills in total. The value of your traps are to waste survivors' times, not kill them. And I know how annoying it is when they get a trap off, but just remember that a lot of the pressure that you bring isn't something that you'll observe. So unlike an across the map hatchet hit with the huntress or catching a survivor in a bear trap with the trapper, you won't directly observe your successes at the pig, but you remember that they're still there. So you might be wondering when's the right time to put traps on survivors. A good rule of thumb is to have 1 on a survivor at all times. This means that you'll know at almost all times only 3 survivors working on gens. As I mentioned earlier, the traps gain more and more power as the trial progresses, then become useless at the end. So don't get greedy and save all of them for when there's 1 gen left, but also don't burn through all of them in the beginning of the trial. As you'll play, you'll get a sense of when it's best to put them on, and eventually you'll just do it when it feels right. Also with my build, if you put a trap on someone and assuming you made it to the hook, once they're unhooked, there's a survivor running around to jigsaw boxes who can't hear your terror radius, and for 90 seconds are the only one who can cleanse a totem whose aura they can't see. So this gets into the ethics of tunneling, and you have to decide how much salt you're okay with in the endgame chat, but you have an easy target, and if you can get a survivor out of the game as fast as possible, the power dynamic shifts significantly. With all that, let's get into the stats of my games. After 50 matches, I averaged 2.76 kills, and the survivors completed an average of 3.76 generators. Now looking at individual matches, almost half my games ended up in a 4K. I felt so powerful as the pig, and would get some of the best win streaks that I've ever experienced. Now looking at individual gen stats, I was really surprised by my data, since it felt like I had a ton of time to chase survivors. Opposed to the Huntress where I felt the gen rush, my build gave me all the time I need to do some serious damage. So don't be misled by this data, but if you want to swap out 1 or both of the perks that block gens for perks that regress gens, feel free to try it. I hope that my experience can help you learn this killer and realize that even if she is the weakest killer in the game, it won't feel like it if you play her correctly.
So guys, with